It's my privilege and my pleasure today to talk to you about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and the tokenization of assets, and Satan's no-buy, no-sell regime, as stated in Revelation 13:17. What we're witnessing around the world, and which I'll show you evidence of, is that the nations around the world are erecting the architecture to enforce Satan's no-buy, no-sell policy, which we see in Revelation 13, and I'll show you that. So just a disclaimer, this is just for educational purposes. This isn't financial, investment, or legal advice. I am a lawyer. I'm a licensed attorney in New York, but I can't give you legal advice or financial advice at this point, and at any point, really. I'm not licensed to give financial advice, and I don't know your situation, so please don't take any of this as financial or legal advice. So who am I, and why should you listen to me? I'm a New York lawyer, and I trade currencies and equity and commodity futures. I've practiced law in New York for 19 years. I've been licensed for 25 years. And I trade the equity and commodity futures in the financial markets. And I trade the equity and commodity futures in the financial markets. So as such, I'm constantly reading what the central banks are doing. And I watch their statements, their monetary policy movements. And I constantly monitor their activity so that I can see what they're doing around the world. So that's why I wanted to share this with you. And why am I sharing this? I share this because we are called to be watchmen. We are Christ's ambassadors, watchmen unto the house of Israel, to see the dangers that await souls and give them warning, according to Sister White. And she also said, the Lord is soon coming. The watchmen on the walls of Zion are called upon to awake their God-given responsibility. Many of them are in stupor of insensibility. God calls for watchmen who are in the power of the Spirit to give the world a message. Watchmen who will proclaim the time of night. He calls for watchmen who will arouse men and women from their lethargy, lest they sleep the sleep of death. And I think that's so important because what we see playing out in the financial markets, or at least what I'm seeing, and then the changes in monetary policy around the world, is directly related to Revelation 13. And I want to show you that. I feel this burden on my heart to share this with you. So Revelation 13:15-16 states, and he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many who would not worship the beast should be killed. The image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both great, rich, and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. And Revelation 13:17, the most critical part of this passage, states, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And so this is critical because how could they do this? Revelation 13:17, cbdcwatch.substack.com, where I write about these things and these developments, so you're welcome to join that if you would like. But this is so important because this passage and these passages that I've read you show that at some point we're going to be under such financial repression and under a death penalty if we do not worship the beast. And we don't want to worship the beast because that results in eternal death, as we learn in the rest of Revelation. But how could they keep you from buying or keep you from selling? I'll show you how they can do that. CBDCs and the tokenization of assets, which they are planning and building right now, is how that they could do that. So what are CBDCs? Central bank digital currency is fully programmable, fully traceable digital currency that is centralized and distributed by a government or its central bank. Because it is centralized to one authority, as opposed to being decentralized, it's fully controlled and programmed by the authority that issues it. This means the government can, number one, surveil all financial transactions, and number two, control when, where, and upon what you can spend the currency. So why are CBDCs a threat to liberty? With CBDCs, the government would have the authority to decide and the power to enforce how you may or may not spend the CBDC that would be assigned to your digital wallet, which would be tied to your digital ID. CBDCs are designed to financially constrain the user in any way that the government wishes to constrain the user, to elicit whatever behavior it wants from the user. This is how, in Revelation 13:17, they could prevent you from buying or selling. And this is not just me saying this. The Bank of International Settlements, the general manager, Augustin Carstens, said in October 2020, he was describing the difference between cash and digital currency, and I've shown this video on my Substack. This video is readily found on the internet. The central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability, and will have the technology to enforce that. That's how central bank digital currency differs from the payment methods that we use now. Because the payment methods that we use now, using your credit card or your debit card, the government can't control that. They can't turn it on or turn it off at will, but with central bank digital currency, they could do that. Steve Forbes also said government digital cash is a formula for tyranny. What is true freedom? True freedom is financial freedom, which is the freedom to conduct whatever financial transactions you choose to conduct, to spend your money as you please, to give to the charities of your choice, or to save as much of your money as you deem appropriate. True financial freedom is freedom to conduct your financial transactions in secrecy, in privacy, without the oversight or control of a central authority. So the difference between cash and CBDCs. Cash transactions offer secrecy and privacy that's necessary to have freedom. People can use cash to make transactions without leaving a paper trail. Cash doesn't expire. It's not dependent upon electricity or network coverage. It's physical. When you hold it, you have it. With CBDCs, there's no privacy in any financial transaction. CBDCs would be fully traceable, meaning that every transaction would be recorded on the central bank's ledger and monitored by the central bank. This would allow the central banks to surveil and control your financial transactions. CBDCs are digital, they're not physical. They're vulnerable to cyber attacks. They're fully programmable, meaning the government can set the rules as to how, when, where, or on what you can spend the currency. If the government wanted to outlaw or restrict the sale or purchase of guns or any other item, they could program the CBDC such that it could not be used to purchase those items. The government or central bank can program it to expire within 30 days or any time period that they set, forcing you to spend the digital cash and convert it to goods before it evaporates. And this is a feature that they actually like, that they say in their papers. They really like that feature, that they can set it to expire. This would prevent you from being able to save it or let it accumulate. So, like I said, with a CBDC, the central bank or government can see all of your transactions in real time and tax you instantly. They can mandate that any and all medical treatments be taken. They have the ability to turn off your money or freeze your balances if you do not comply with a CBDC. They could turn off your money if they don't like what you post on social media. They could turn off your money if they don't like your religious beliefs or practices. If the government passed a Sunday law mandating that all people worship on Sunday, the government could turn off your money or otherwise restrict your spending in your assigned digital wallet if you do not comply. Like I said, the CBD could be programmed to expire within 30 days. Or it could be programmed so that it cannot be used to buy certain goods or services. Also, the central bank could institute negative interest rates, which would cause a portion of your money to be periodically deducted from your digital wallet. And this is not unheard of because Japan has had a negative interest rate policy since 2016. When we were at zero interest rates for 14 years, there was the talk and speculation and a possibility that we might fall into negative interest rates in order to stimulate the economy. Fortunately, that did not happen. Interest rates were raised instead, but it was a concern at some point. And this isn't just hyperbole. Brazil's CBDC pilot contains code that could freeze or reduce your funds, a developer stated. A developer examined their CBDC code that they had open source released to the public and analyzed it and found that the central bank could, at will, according to the code, freeze and unfreeze accounts, increase and decrease account balances, move currency from one address to another, and create or burn the digital real from a specific address. So this is a concern, and this is a threat to your liberties. This is how the government could control your behavior based on this ability. Also, it's not just me saying this. Neil Kashkari, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, basically was interviewed and he was asked about CBDC. And he stated that it doesn't solve any actual problems. It doesn't add anything novel to the market in terms of benefits for the consumers. But what it does do It allows central bankers to monitor all your transactions, impose negative interest rates, or deduct taxes directly from your accounts in real time. And what he actually said, this is a transcript of what he said, I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside of the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. He said, I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. And someone laughed in the background. He said, right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. Well, China's doing it. Well, I can see why China would do it, he said. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with a CBDC. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to directly tax consumer accounts, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get why China would be interested, but why would the American people be for that? And that's the question we asked. If the American people or the Canadian people or any people around the world understood the power that's given to governments with central bank digital currency, they wouldn't want them either. And that's what we actually find. In the countries to date that have launched their own retail CBDC, adoption and use of that central bank digital currency is extremely low. According to data from the Atlantic Council, as of March 2024, 134 countries and currency unions representing 90% of global GDP are exploring a CBDC right now. So, and there's a Chilot's pilot program was expanded to reach most of the country in 2023. Also, a 2022 survey conducted by the Bank of International Settlements revealed that 93% of the central banks that surveyed have or are developing a CBDC. And it was projected that there could be 15 retail CBDCs publicly circulating by 2030. So just to show you, this is how far, according to the Atlantic Council, how far CBDC is developing around the world. Most of them are in research phases, various levels of research phases. A few countries, like I showed you, have launched. And China and India have very extensive pilot programs that have been going on for some time. According to CBDCtracker.org, this is how far CBDCs have spread around the world and are being developed around the world. So this is truly a worldwide phenomenon. Now there's a difference, there's a couple of ways that the CBDC could be issued and instituted by the central bank. There's direct issue CBDC, where the central bank directly issues the CBDC to the customer, or synthetic CBDC, where there's a major bank that stands between the customer and the central bank. And what we've seen is that both the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank have indicated that they will pursue a synthetic CBDC model. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell confirmed in September 22 during an event hosted by the Bank of France that if we were to pursue a CBDC, it would at a minimum have the following four characteristics. First, it would be intermediated, meaning that there would be a major bank standing between the central bank and the customer. Second is privacy protected, but third is identity verified, so it would not be anonymous. So you could not have privacy in any of your financial transactions if the Federal Reserve were to adopt a CBDC, if the ECB were to adopt a CBDC, if the Canadian government were to adopt a CBDC. You would not have any privacy in your financial transactions. The CBDCs would also still be, even if there's an intermediary bank, they would still be fully traceable, programmable, and tied to your digital ID, meaning that every transaction would be recorded, monitored, and programmed and controlled by the major bank on behalf of the central bank. So there would still be that level of control, even with intermediation by a major bank. And on March 7th, 2024, before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell testified that if we were ever to do something like this, and he says we're a very long way from even thinking about it, we would do this through the banking system, he said. The last thing we would want with the Federal Reserve would be to have individual accounts for all Americans, or any Americans for that matter. So he confirmed that the U.S. would adopt a synthetic CBDC model, which means the central bank would have its ledger issue the CBDC through a major bank to the customer. And he keeps saying, we're a long way from even thinking about it. He said before, we're not even thinking about a CBDC, but I'll show you evidence that not only are they thinking about it, they've tested it quite extensively, and their tests have been quite successful. For the European Central Bank, President Christine Lagarde also said that if they were to issue a CBDC, it would be through supervised intermediaries. They issued a press release on October 18th, 2023, that they exited the investigation stage and they entered the preparation stage for a CBDC. And they designed it so that it would be distributed through banks, through supervised intermediaries. And they signaled that there would be control. In the same press release, the ECB stated that there would be limitations on the amount of digital euros that individuals or businesses might hold in their digital wallets. Page 12 of the summary report stated that holding limits were identified as an effective tool. So they would be included in the design of a digital euro. That's concerning because if holding limits are affected as a tool and businesses and individuals are limited in the amount of digital euros that they can hold, it prevents them from being able to accumulate or save digital euros. So there will be control. President Christine Lagarde was prank called by someone who was impersonating the president of the Ukraine, and she admitted that spending more than 1,000 euros in cash already is illegal and puts you on the gray market. And she went even further to say that it's dangerous, she feels it's dangerous to permit an individual to spend 300 or 400 euros in cash in total anonymity. So she's very against privacy of cash. She wants to see control, and the central banks around the world would like to see this control. What is the Bank of Canada's progress towards a CBDC? Well, the Bank of Canada has been actively researching a CBDC, actively exploring a retail CBDC since 2017. It's called the e-dollar. Though they say they have no immediate plans to launch a CBDC, they want to be ready should cash no longer be used at some point. So what the Bank of Canada found in their survey is most Canadians they heard from placed high importance on having access to banknotes as currency backed by the central bank. This was because of their wide acceptance, universal availability, and transactional privacy. What the Bank of Canada says is next for them is that, directly stated from their statement, in an era of rapid digitalization, the bank is undertaking the necessary work to be ready if Canadians' payment preferences or needs change. Ultimately, the decision upon whether or not to issue a digital dollar will be up to Canadians and their elected representatives in Parliament. They want to be ready in case there is a preference for a digital dollar. So they are actively researching this and developing this behind the sidelines. What we have in the United States right now is FedNow, which is just an instant payment system. It's not a CBDC, but it's a foundation on which a CBDC can be built. The Federal Reserve launched FedNow in July 2023, and right now 728 banks and financial institutions are participating in it, although the Fed's goal is to have 10,000 financial institutions participating in it. There's 34 settlement agents and liquidity providers and 30 certified service providers. So what it does is that it is a service that the banks and financial institutions can use to offer programs to their customers that would allow for instant, fast payments to be issued, fast transactions issued by the banks to their customers. So right now, it's not a CBDC, but it is a fast payment infrastructure so that financial institutions can offer similar programs to their customers. So Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, in his testimony before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee on March 7, 2024, he reiterated that they're nowhere near adopting a CBDC, but I'll show you they've actually been testing quite successfully a CBDC. He stated, we're nowhere near recommending or let alone adopting a central bank digital currency in any form. People don't need to worry about it, he says, but I'll show you that they're actually very close to releasing one. So Project Hamilton is a multi-year exploratory research project by the Boston Fed and the MIT's Digital Currency Initiative. They are collaborating on exploratory research known as Project Hamilton, and they're looking on understanding CBDC's technical challenges and opportunities. They've issued this report, which you can find online. Phase 1 of their executive summary report was released in February 2022, and it reported that the initial testing was extremely successful, and it exceeded their initial speed requirements and throughput requirements. They tested 2 different architectures during that phase 1 testing period. One of the architectures demonstrated a throughput of 1.7 million transactions per second, with 99% of transactions durably completed in under a half a second. During this testing period, they tested 2 architectures, one of which demonstrated a throughput of 1.7 million transactions per second, with 99% of transactions completed in under a second. This tested architecture was also found to have scalability and resilience, according to their report. And then later in December 2022, they reported that the open CBDC core processing engine that they're working on was found to have the ability to support 1.84 million transactions per second, meaning that settlement and the completion of the transaction was done in under 1 second. So this is what they've been working on, and they're still working on. But Fed Chairman Jerome Powell has testified that they will not launch a CBDC without congressional authorization. And he said that many, many times. And he was asked by Senator Cynthia Lummis on March 7th, do you still agree that the Federal Reserve cannot introduce a U.S. central bank digital currency without congressional authorization? And he said, yes, I do. And he does stand by that. But we could find Congress authorizing this if there were some sort of crisis. If they were to bring about a real or perceived crisis, Congress can act very quickly to give the authorization that he says he's waiting for. And we've seen that in our recent history. How soon could Congress respond in a real or perceived crisis? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic was first reported to the World Health Organization on December 31st, 2019. And our Congress in the United States passed 2 laws in response to that, the CARES Act and the PrEP Act, on March 27th, 2020. That's only 2 months and 26 days after the pandemic was reported to the WHO. So Congress has demonstrated that they can act very quickly if they are faced with a real or perceived crisis. It's really all they need in order to launch this technology in the United States. In Nigeria, they have launched their e-Naira. Unfortunately, they did it in a very barbaric and totalitarian way when they launched it. They launched the e-Naira on October 25th, 2021. Their goal was to achieve 90% adoption and use by the population. But in reality, as of October 2022, only less than 0.5% of the population will use the CBDC. What the Nigerian government did was, at the end of 2022, outgoing President Muhammadu Buhari's government decided to change the currency design and swap out old banknotes for new banknotes, creating a shortage of cash, artificially creating a shortage of cash in order to try to force Nigerians to use the CBDC. That did not go very well. They also cut ATM limits for cash withdrawals down to $45 per day in order to force people to use the e-Naira CBDC. Instantly, it didn't take long, reports erupted on Twitter and other social media outlets that people could not obtain the cash to cover their basic needs, leading to riots and violent protests. So we see how in February 2023, how the Nigerian people responded when they were limited in the amount of cash that they could use and forced to use the CBDC. Violence and riots erupted. And we could potentially see that here if the government releases the CBDC in an irresponsible way and limits access to cash or takes access to cash away from the people. This is how people could respond. And of course, we don't want that. We don't want to see that in the United States. We don't want to see that in Canada. But it's important to learn from history and how other banks or other central banks have released their CBDC, that hopefully other countries around the world have learned this lesson and will not release it in the same way. The protests were also reported on Plus TV in Africa, which you can find online. SWIFT's Sandbox project demonstrated that it could ensure that different countries' CBDCs could all be used together, even if they were built on different underlying technologies or protocols, and thereby they could reduce payment system fragmentation risks. This is important because it shows that on a global scale, even if CBDCs are issued by different countries in different ways, they could all be used together on a global scale, according to the testing through the Sandbox project. It also showed they could be used in highly complex trade or foreign exchange payments and potentially be automated so as to both speed up and lower the cost of the process. So I'd like to speak to you today about tokenization of private assets on the global unified ledger. The Bank of International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank in the world, arguably, it is the central bank that all the central banks go to. They issued their annual report, or one chapter of their annual report, on June 20, 2023, and it was titled Blueprint for the Future Monetary System, Improving the Old, Enabling the New. And what their plan is, their released plan, is to tokenize all privately held assets on a global unified ledger that would be controlled by one authority and would be fully programmable. Per their report, in a tokenized setting, money or assets become executable objects that are maintained on programmable platforms. So they're talking about tokenizing all assets, your car, your house, your bank deposits, any securities you own, potentially any artwork you own. Any asset that you have could be tokenized, real property. Any land that you have could be tokenized on their programmable platform. They explained in their report that tokens aren't merely digital entries in a database, but they integrate the records of the underlying asset that's normally found in a traditional database with the rules and logic governing the transfer process for that asset. So each token would be programmed with rules as to what the asset can or can't do, that it would be programmed with smart contracts, which would act as if-then statements. If this money comes in, the asset can be transferred to this buyer, such as that. That's an example of what they could do. It also would contain the information as to what the asset is, where it comes from, who owns it. Because each asset would exist as a digital token on a programmable platform that's controlled by one authority, that authority could potentially prevent you from either owning that asset, transferring that asset. They would fully control any ownership of or transfer of any of your assets if your assets were to be tokenized on this global unified ledger. In this chapter of the annual report that contained this plan to tokenize all property, the Bank of International Settlements defined tokenization as a process of recording claims on financial or real assets that exist on a traditional ledger on a programmable platform. That programmable platform would be controlled by one authority. It also stated that the programmable platform would have a data environment that would encompass all tokenized assets, plus all information necessary to incorporate real-world events into contingent performance of actions. What does that mean? Well, if you were doing something that the government didn't like, that information could come into the data environment on this programmable platform, and potentially the one authority that controls programmability of this platform could take your assets from you. Like we've seen in the United States with the January 6th people, anyone who was in DC, we've seen their liberties and finances affected by actions that they took on January 6th. Also in Canada, what we saw with the truckers and the trucker protests, anyone who was involved in that protest saw their bank accounts seized. This could happen even more efficiently with tokenization of assets. It could happen even more efficiently with central bank digital currencies. The government could take your money or your assets if it doesn't like what you're doing, potentially. This is a real danger with this technology that they're talking about in their report. So the unified ledger wouldn't just store tokenized versions of every piece of private property on the planet, but every piece of information from real-world events that could possibly impact assets or transactions, they would be impacted on the global unified ledger. The Boston Consulting Group did some research with ADDX, a Singapore-related exchange for security tokens, and they found that by 2030, 16 trillion worth of assets around the world could be tokenized. So this is something that they're moving for. They're steadily tokenizing more and more assets. In 2023, 2024, it's been increasing as we see, and they project that it could increase up to $16 trillion worth of assets tokenized by 2030. So are we ready for the coming storm? This is how they say, the World Economic Forum has famously said, it's 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. This is potentially how that they could accomplish that. Through CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, the tokenization of all private property on the global unified ledger as the Bank of International Settlements plans, your securities, any private property, your home, your car, your real property, your land, any securities you own or bank deposits could be tokenized on the global unified ledger and then controlled by that one authority. So you may think you own your assets, but you don't actually have control of them because the one central authority that controls the programmable ledger would control your assets. And that's how they could accomplish this. So what would it take? There's not much. I mean, there's many things that we face today. We face potential economic collapse, global economic collapse they've talked about, wars, new wars coming up, cyber attacks, food shortages, a new pandemic. The World Economic Forum has talked about all of these things. It really, all they need is a real or perceived crisis, and the countries around the world that are working on a CBDC could quickly launch a CBDC, and we could be faced with the type of situation that we read about in Revelation 13:17. That's why this is important, and that's why this is important to watch what's going on around the world. It could result in the financial enslavement of all people that we read about in Revelation 13:17. Federal Reserve Jerome Powell testified before the U.S. Banking Committee on March 7, 2024, that there will be bank failures, but not the big banks. That's what he said. He said, we've identified banks that have high commercial real estate concentrations, particularly office retail ones that have been affected a lot. He said, this is a problem that we'll be working on for years more, I'm sure, he said. There will be bank failures, but not the big banks. This is part of the plan, I believe, with the Federal Reserve and with central banks around the world, at least in the United States with the Federal Reserve. We are seeing banks fail. We've had 4 bank failures here in the United States since 2023. And I think we'll see more of them based on the high interest rates that we see in the United States that is causing losses in the commercial real estate area, as well as losses with respect to bonds and treasury bills that were issued at 0 interest rates. So less than 50 days after Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell testified, Republic First Bank Corp failed on April 26, 2024. This was the 4th bank to fail since 2023. And those 3 bank failures had held $532 billion in assets, more than all the lenders that collapsed during the 2008 crisis. Only 1 year ago, we witnessed the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic Bank, and Signature Bank. Now, Republic First has failed. But those 3 bank failures alone represented more assets than all the lenders that collapsed in the 2008 crisis. So this is a documentary that's worth checking out. It's called The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. He did a lot of research. He's a former hedge fund guy, and he did a lot of research showing that the laws, at least in the United States, in each state, with respect to the ownership of securities have been changed so that you don't have an outright ownership in your securities that you purchase. You have an entitlement interest. And the bankruptcy laws have also been changed. He goes into great detail showing how the clearinghouses could instantly take your securities in the case of an economic collapse. It would be triggered very quickly. He's only talking about securities. The threat posed by the Bank of International Settlements plan to tokenize all assets on a global unified ledger is a much greater threat because it pertains to all of your assets. But this is one way they could take your securities, according to David Rogers Webb in this documentary, which is really worth watching. What can we do? In The Great Taking, David Rogers Webb interviews and talks to many people who lived through the Great Depression. And one story he talks about was an older friend of his who was a child at the time of the Great Depression. And that child's parents were killed in a car accident just before the Great Depression. And that child was sent to live with his grandparents on the farm. And he didn't know there was a Great Depression happening because they had everything they could ever want on the farm. And that's a pretty nice example and very instructive of if we have land out in the country, if we have ways and means to produce food In the event of an economic collapse, it would not be so painful or so tragic if we have those things. That's something to consider. What else can we do? I would throw out your smart TV, because the terms and conditions in a lot of these smart TVs, if you look at them, you give them permission to photograph you and film you in your home. So although we all walk around with cell phones that are spying on us, we shouldn't do that as well. But if we could limit the ways that we can be spied on and surveilled by our governments, that would always be a good thing. I would also get off Wi-Fi and hardwire your home. Your internet would be faster, and the potential to which you can be spied on would be reduced as well. Avoid using or becoming reliant on the control grid. Avoid using CBDCs if they're launched in your country. Avoid using or having a digital ID. Avoid vaccine passports. Avoid any non-cash payments of method if you can. The more that we can do that, the more we can avoid being controlled by the control grid. God provided food for Elijah, and God will provide for us. We don't have to have a spirit of fear or be afraid of these things. We know that God will provide for us. I also recommend having a means of food production, and also, more importantly, learning foraging skills. There's many native plants around us that are readily available, that are safe to eat, nutritious, rich in vitamins, and have medicinal properties. And there's many helpful books on the subject that you can study in order to do this. God will provide food for us, but wouldn't it be nice if we could meet him halfway and at least be able to identify the plants around us that are already growing around us that we could eat for food if we need to. So improving your foraging skills is very important. Find and buy food now from a local food farmer, and build relationships with like-minded farmers, so that in a time where there might not be as much food on the supermarket shelves, you have a source of food that you could go to. God will bless us. He who taught Adam and Eve in Eden how to tend the garden desires to instruct us today. There's wisdom for him who drives the plow and sows the seed. Before those who trust and obey him, God will open new ways of advance. Let them move forward and courageously trusting in him to supply their needs according to the riches of his goodness, according to Sister White. And that's so wise. And God has treasures for us in the country. The earth has blessings hidden in her depths for those who have the courage and will and perseverance to gather her treasures. Fathers and mothers who possess a piece of land and a comfortable home are kings and queens, according to Sister White in Country Living. And Pastor Doug Batchelor has said on Amazing Facts, God originally intended people to be in nature to enjoy the incredible works of his hands. Working in outdoors can reduce your stress and help you take in the life-giving properties of sunshine, fresh air, and exercise. And it can give you peace and draw you in a closer relationship with our Creator. With the blessing of God, the land will supply our needs. Sister White says, if the land is cultivated, it will, with the blessing of God, supply our necessities. We're not to be discouraged about temporal things because of apparent failures or disheartened by delay. We should work the soil cheerfully, hopefully, gratefully, believing that the earth holds rich stores for the faithful worker, richer than gold or silver. And she also counseled that serious times are ahead, and I think we've seen that with the recent pandemic. We've been warned by international entities around the world that we will face more serious times. So let us prepare now, and let us be ready. It's Satan's purpose to attract men and women to the cities and to gain his object. He invents every kind of novelty and amusement, every kind of excitement to lure them there. And Sister White says the cities of the earth today are becoming as they were before the flood, and that's very true. We're seeing that more and more today, even more so than in her time. So the time now is to awaken and prepare, and I implore you please to take this seriously and to look around and see what's going on around us. The Bible instructs us that we should pray our flight not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. We know at some point we're going to be on foot. We know at some point from the Bible that we're going to lose all of our possessions. We know at some point that we won't be able to buy or sell. We should not make that drive us into a fear state, but we should do what we can to prepare. What we see with central bank digital currencies and the global unified ledger is that they're going to be used as instruments of control. That's what they're being developed for. They're being developed to take control from us and put it centrally in one authority. And that is completely consistent with what we read in Revelation 13:17. We read in Revelation 13:17 that we'll be under such financial repression. And these tools are strikingly very consistent with that passage. Matthew 24 also says, pray that your flight not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. The Bible instructs us that at some point we will lose our possessions and our money if we don't worship the beast. And we should not worship the beast at all under any circumstances. We should be instead happy and count it as a blessing to lose our property and our assets and our money and any ability to buy or sell. If we lose those, we know we'll be on the right side of this great controversy. So we shouldn't have a spirit of fear and we should not worry, but we should watch and we should be prepared. We shouldn't let the coming of the Lord find us sleeping and unprepared. We should be prepared to meet him. And the times that we're living in are showing us that that time is coming quickly. And Romans 13:11 says, knowing now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we believed. And we could really see that in today's time. Serious times are ahead, and Sister White tells us that in order to prepare, we should be totally in earnest in our relationship with God. We should seek to strengthen this relationship, to satisfy our emotional and spiritual needs, and to learn the power of prayer. The power of prayer will be so helpful to bring us peace, but also to bring peace and comfort to people around us who will also be going through difficult times. So what should we do to prepare for the Great Tribulation? Form an intimate relationship with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Pray without ceasing and pray as never before. Watch as these events unfold and look for the signs of Jesus coming. We should work for Jesus. We should use our gifts and talents for his glory. Those are the best things that we can do to prepare for the times that are coming. We should pray and read the Bible daily. Sister White says in The Great Controversy that Satan well knows that all whom he can lead to neglect prayer and searching the scriptures will be overcome by his attacks. Therefore, he invents every possible device to engross the mind. And how do we see that today? We see that so much today in the devices that distract us during our daily life. And Satan also wants to prevent us from preparation for the time of trouble. If he can keep us sleeping, if he can keep us unprepared, we could potentially be lost. And that's what Sister White says also in The Great Controversy. Satan will, if possible, prevent them from attaining a preparation to stand in that day. He will so arrange affairs to hedge up their way, entangle them with earthly treasures, cause them to carry a heavy, wearisome burden, that their hearts may be overcharged with the cares of this life, and the day of trial may come upon them as a thief. We don't want that to happen to us. So let's awaken, prepare, and keep watching and keep praying and strengthen our relationship with God, because our relationship with God is really what's going to carry us through any difficult times that we face. So I want to encourage you not to be afraid, because God does not want us to have a spirit of fear. John 16:33 says, "These things I have spoken unto you, that you might have peace. In the world you should have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world." So God doesn't want us to have a spirit of fear, and we shouldn't have a spirit of fear. All these things show us how soon Jesus' coming is. So we should be celebrating, and we should prepare, but be very happy, because soon we are going home. And that's what these developments are showing us. Let's not be afraid. Let's rejoice. In all things rejoice, and just keep praying and strengthening our relationship with God, and that will bring us joy in these last days. Jesus is coming soon.